So my first question that I want to ask you is that why is SEC doing this at this time?
Well, we regulate a market, and sometimes you observe some challenges in the marketplace. As we discussed, we allow people to address their challenges. These are businesses, so we give them a chance to solve their problems. But again, they're regulated businesses, so there's a public interest to ensure that the solutions that they bring to bear are in the interest of all their customers. Um, so having looked at these troubled firms, um, we made a determination to go ahead and revoke their licenses. It's an attempt to really sanitize the industry and to make sure that those who remain are able to operate, and that there's also a space for us to implement a new regime. I think we've talked about some of the reforms we were hoping to implement earlier on. Um, if you have a lot of distressed firms, it's hard to implement some of these things because you'll find that they're causing, they're not able to pay investors. Some of them as far back as 2016, 2017, they've struggled to make payments. Um, so it became really necessary for the regulator to step in. Yeah.
One critical question that some people have asked, and they're already asking, is that did you really give the firms enough time to correct their troubles before coming with this action? 53 firms, that is quite huge, before revoking their licenses.
I mean, if you look at it from a pure numbers, 53 seems large. Um, but as we speak, about 21 of them were at minimal levels of operation. Either they had ceased operations or they'd even come to us to surrender their license, right? So the question becomes, if a firm ceases operations, what happens to their customers? And have they put in place the measures to address their customer requirements? So if you take out the 21, then you're looking at 32 firms. And here, again, if you look at the press release we had, we talk about, one, some of them had portfolio issues where we have restrictions on what firms can do. We issue some directives on commercial paper. We issue directives on the businesses that we expect them to do. And in some instances, you find heavy concentration. Now, if you go to, if you go to a fund manager and you say, I want to do a particular kind of business, and you're aware of that risk, that is fine. But for the fund manager to turn around and give it to a related party in a significant level of concentration, one would look at what kind of due diligence has gone into it, and did they consider all the investment options, and what does that mean for their customers if that investment fails, right? And is the customer aware of the risk of that investment? So there are instances of regulatory issues. You also find that some firms have not been submitting results. So again, there, the first level is we give them warnings, we apply fines. The next level becomes, some firms on the list were even suspended before. If you realize a few months ago, we suspended some firms, and they were required to comply. Right. Once you've been warned, you've been given a chance to address those issues. The next step is further and stronger action. There are also the firms, I mentioned the complaints. So to the extent where you're not able to resolve your complaints, then it means you are illiquid, right? You're unable to meet obligations as and when they fall due. So then that also becomes a trigger from our perspective, because from a corporate law perspective, if a firm is not able to meet its obligations, for us as a regulator, we can encourage them to come up with arrangements to meet those obligations.
Did you do that? That's what I want to get to. That did you get to the point where you said, Georgia Affe Investment, Georgia Affe Fund, a financial house, we've identified XYZ with you. Come up with the plan B to turn things around. We're giving you 3 months, 4 months. If you fail to do that, we're going to act. Were all those avenues exhausted before you went in to tell Georgia Affe that, I'm sorry, I'm taking your license?
No, I think there was ample opportunity.
You think what happened?
No, it did. We gave people opportunities. When there were complaints, we called hearings. We gave them a chance to resolve it. We instructed them to make arrangements to make payments. Um, some people brought some plans. Some plans we felt they had credible means of execution. Other plans were not so credible. The ones that were not so credible, we put on alert. The ones that seemed a potential pathway, we considered, and we also gave them some time. But at some point, you have to draw the line. And I think that one, as a regulator, we have to take some strong actions. You listen to people, you try and see how they solve their problems, and then at some point, you have to move to protect the investor, to protect the people who are struggling, who have put their last CD into some of these investments, and who may not necessarily have appreciated diversification because they think these are professional players. These people should be able to invest in a way that when I need my resources, when I have a need, it can be met, right? So that's really the expectation, and that is where you find a gap. So for us stepping in, it's also to address a social issue where you find that investors have resources locked up, the fund manager is unable to pay, and time has elapsed, right? So at that point, has the fund manager exhausted all his? Because sometimes we find that they are not putting in the best efforts. They've had a loan that has gone bad. They haven't really pursued it, or they have, but they are not pushing in as much as they could. And so it's that at that point that we also have to make a decision.
Was there any firm that came in with a plan that was excused from this list of companies that have gone down?
Well, for the firms that we didn't just start off with firms going down. We look at our whole universe and we say that these are the firms that have challenges. We had some criteria we looked at, and again, when we look at this information, we make a determination as to what are the solutions, what are the ways out of this, what are the commitments that they're making. From a breach perspective, we give timelines. So if timelines are proposed and they are not functioning, again, that's exactly.
Let's come to what happens to the market woman that has placed money in this firm, mega firm, financial services, and all the rest. What is the process to recover his or her money now that you've announced that this company has lost his or her license? What is the plan now for that person to get his or her money back based on whatever you've done?
Yes. So I think the first port of call is that early next week we'll start a validation process, and we will allow investors.
That's Monday?
We
Tuesday,
we'll make announcements because again there are logistics to be put in place. But we'll make announcements and give people timelines on where they can file their claims. For now, we encourage the public to remain calm. We are putting arrangements in place to ensure that things happen in an orderly manner. And there will be the appropriate notifications as and when we progress. But the framework, as we mentioned, is that we'll make some reliefs available. And that's also part of the reliefs that we are looking at for investors. We'll make some resources available once we've done the validation exercise and we are satisfied that the claimants are who they say they are. And then following that, we mentioned the next steps we take, which is to try to retrieve those assets. They will rely on the Registrar General to proceed to also look at liquidating some of these businesses.
What have you been able? I mean, it took a while to take the decision and all the rest. What have you been able to establish as in the assets that these companies were holding in terms of the value, and what has also? Let me establish first what assets, the total assets that these companies that you've actually withdrawn their license were holding.
Well, at this point, we'll have to, now that we've revoked their licenses, because part of the problem is if you find a firm is not reporting frequently, your visibility on their asset profile is challenged. Your visibility on the performance on their instruments on transactions they've done with related parties is also limited. So we will ascertain that information, and I think that's also part of the need to have moved at this time. So that exercise will also happen. We'll establish the asset base, but there are some assets. Some of the funds we're talking about are actually, some of the firms are pension fund managers. So those assets are actually ring fenced and are held by custodians. We expect that those assets are safe. They are in very specific instruments with very specific guidelines on what can be done with those assets. So that's where we are.
But Mr. Bibiu, that is quite interesting. I believe that all those work has been done already. We are even hearing figures of about $1 billion Ghana cedis and all the rest. So some would say that it's interesting that you are now trying to establish the assets that these firms hold.
No, a lot of the figures we have are reports they send us, right? So at the point where, because you assume that they are telling you the truth, right?
So it's about $1 billion there.
No, we have about 1 billion complaints. We have
What about the assets that they are holding?
Oh, you're asking about what they hold.
Yeah, based on
The estimate is about 8 billion. 8 billion, including pension funds. Including pension funds. I think the question, the reason why I was trying to say that there needs to be some further verification is that for some of the firms, they've not reported for a while. So you would go in there, you'd have a sense of the assets, but if the assets are not performing, for instance, they would have to be provisioned, right? And so that's where you have to find, even though we can say a number, it may not be what you see when you go into the business. Exactly.
But, so 8 billion, and how much has government provided for this?
For now, I cannot disclose that.
But is there,